Welcome everyone to our first BSF book club. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Brilliant Art Spectrum, New Village Arts, Moonlight Youth Theater, and SoCal Green Screen. Additional thanks to Eben Smith and Associates and Del Rio Studios. First, we have Starmisha Jones, who is a nationally certified school psychologist currently working on the East Coast. Serving in a K-8 school setting, she has experience in preschool through 12th grade settings. She is passionate about equity, Moonlight Youth Theater, and SoCal. Welcome everyone to our first BSF book club. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Brilliant Art Spectrum, New Village Arts, Moonlight Youth Theater, and SoCal Green Screen. Additional thanks to Eben Smith and Associates and Del Rio Studios. First, we have Starmisha Jones, who is a nationally certified school psychologist currently working on the East Coast. Serving in a K-8 school setting, she has experience in preschool through 12th grade settings. She is passionate about equity, social justice, mental health, and all things travel. Next is Susie Hidalgo Faring, a certified PK-5 bilingual educator in Longmont, Colorado. She currently works as a third grade bilingual teacher. Susie has dedicated her career in working with marginalized communities. Her priority in the classroom is empowering students to view their gift of multilingualism as an asset to their educational experience. As a member of both the Colorado Education Association Equity Advisory Council and Congressman Negus's Latino Advisory Council, her focus involves addressing institutional racism, leading with a racial justice lens, and keeping equity at the center of all policy and practices. Currently, Susie serves as City Councilor for Longmont. A passionate educator and advocate, Camila Brown has served families throughout Los Angeles and San Diego counties. The avid storyteller has worked with teachers and students in both general and special education in grades K through 12. She works with nonprofit organizations that focus on literacy, youth empowerment, STEAM, equity, and social justice. Camila believes access to high-quality education to be a basic human right. She currently works in the greater San Diego region as a school administrator. Camila enjoys all things language, culture, and travel. A leading edge and National Geographic certified educator, Cassiopeia Guthrie is credentialed in K-12 education with specializations in biliteracy and middle-level education, storytelling through digital media, and blended and online instruction. She currently works as a district ed tech TOSA in the greater San Diego region. Cassiopeia is passionate about equity work in the educational and art spaces and believes that culturally and historically responsive curriculum, restorative justice, and competency and project-based learning are important tools in our educator toolboxes. And now we will have Starmisha lead our land acknowledgement.
Hello, everyone. In advance of our discussion, I invite participants to join in the following reflection. We want to first acknowledge that this virtual book club is being hosted by presenters throughout the unceded territories of California, Colorado, and New York, all of which are collectively home to over 120 tribal nations. We acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of our respective and various regions. I am currently hosting online from my snowy home in Rochester, New York, on the traditional territory and homelands of the Onondaga, the Great Hill people, known as the Seneca, or the Keepers of the Western Door. They, along with the Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, and Tuscarora nations, form the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Today, the people who are building the Longhouse continue to celebrate, contribute to the life of our community, celebrate their heritage, practice their traditions, and care for the land and waterways. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of displacement, genocide, and remain cognizant of the fact that we cannot separate overlapping histories of violence that settler colonialism has brought to these lands, spurred by oppression, erasure, and racialized transatlantic enslavement. We honor those who have lived and do live now at the crossroads of identity and experience. These acknowledgements commit us to a lifetime of anti-racist work. We'll now discuss our agenda.
For introducing today's speakers and for Stamisha for the lovely land acknowledgement. I wanted to start off and continue by saying we are really honored for this opportunity to be tackling such an ambitious set of goals today. And so you have the idea of what to expect and what lies ahead. We've built out this agenda for you just to keep us focused on the meat and the heart of the matter, and so that we can have a collective understanding of our time here spent together. On that note, in just a moment, we'll continue by reviewing our norms, our desired outcome. We'll get to some context about the books for the day and enjoy brief readings by some powerful voice performers before diving into why this is important work and how to begin it in your classroom. I'm going to now pass it to my fellow panelist, Susie. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camila. So we all know that as educators, we are end result focused. So with that in mind, we wanted to share and articulate some of our outcomes. Today, our goals are to clarify why equity conversations and the inclusion of diverse texts are important. Secondly, to articulate how educators can implement anti-racist texts, policies, processes, and conversations in their classrooms. And finally, to model what those authentic, vulnerable conversations and lessons can look like. Next slide. So with that said, as part of any important conversation, we want to acknowledge that many of us here bring our own experiences and histories with racism and oppression. While many may experience validation, the material and conversations presented here may spark a sense of trauma, frustration, guilt, and uncomfortableness. With that in mind, our team has generated this list of norms that we are planning to hold to during our presentation. So they are as follows. Please listen and speak with respect. Both verbal and nonverbal language is important. Respect others, privacy, and only tell your own story. And please share time fairly. So in layman's term, or just regular sense, just getting to the point and landing the plane. So listen to understand and not to respond. Expect to be misunderstood, practice forgiveness, lean into discomfort. By committing to these norms, we believe that our conversations here today can be both daring and also change-making. Now we will hear from Cassiopeia.
Thank you, Susie. It's my honor to present our 3 books for the day. Written by a former teen rapper to New York Times best-selling writer, The Hate U Give was Angie Thomas's debut novel. It's the fictional story of a 16-year-old named Star Carter. Star attends a suburban prep school far from her home neighborhood. The idea is she'll have more opportunity at a different school. However, then she's the only witness to the fatal shooting of her unarmed Black friend at the hands of a police officer, and it makes national headlines. This story was inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and was made into a popular and critically acclaimed film, which you might have seen. It's a story about a girl's search for justice. It's incredibly powerful. The second book that we'll be reading from today is Elizabeth Acevedo's The Poet X. Acevedo is a national poetry slam champion with an MFA in creative writing. You may have seen her spoken word poem called My Mother Tells Me to Fix My Hair. The Poet X is a fictional story about a young Afro-Dominican girl, Xiomara Batista, who's growing up in Harlem. She receives a leather-covered journal from her twin brother. She says it's the best gift she's ever gotten. She begins to write about her background, experiences, family, and coming of age through poetry. This book, like the character's journal, is in itself a collection of poems that highlight what it's like for Xiomara to fall in love, to question the teachings of her childhood, and ultimately to claim her voice after she's encouraged by a teacher to join a poetry club at her school. It's a story about the conflicts that can arise as a result of a student's cultural identity. And it's a stirring example of how a teacher can make a difference through intentional action. The third and final text that we'll be reading from today is Stamped: Racism, Antiracism, and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. You may already be familiar with Kendi's work as a historian, a columnist for The Atlantic, or with the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, just as you may have been introduced to New York Times bestselling author Jason Reynolds. Reynolds is well known for his works in the young adult genre. In particular, I enjoyed All American Boys, Miles Morales' Spider-Man, and Long Way Down. These two authors teamed up to create a young adult adaptation of Kendi's original book, Stamped from the Beginning, and it's phenomenal. Stamped introduces historical context from transatlantic slave routes and then connects events through present day and into the future. The authors state that this is not a history book. In fact, history is perennial, they say. It runs through our lives every day. This text is written with unique lengths and structures, which will vary between the chapters, multiple visual stimuli on the pages, and a conversational tone which invites the creation for students of a new anti-racist future at which students are the center. And on that note, without further ado, Susie will be presenting performers, each of whom will be reading a brief passage from one of these texts today.
Okay, thank you. So I'm honored to introduce today our amazing and talented performers. So first, I would like to introduce Carl Atwater. He was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He is a graduate of Howard University with a BFA in theater. Carl is a very busy actor on stage and screen in spite of COVID. He is currently working on 1 stage and 5 film projects. He's a classically trained, oh, my screen is moving, I'm sorry. So he's a classically trained singer and has performed opera at the JFK Kennedy Center, sung backup for Aretha Franklin, and sang at the Alvin Ailey Dance Company and Mary Lou Williams, and has sung at the national anthem at Madison Square Garden on multiple occasions. In April 2021, so this year, Carl can be seen on the stage playing the role of Hoke in Driving Miss Daisy in Rome, Georgia. He was awarded the LA Critics Award for Best Performance in a Musical for his portrayal of Burt Williams in Williams and Walker. Carl is also an accomplished photographer with over 40 years' experience. Candace Crystal is an actor, director, and Florida State alum from Miami, Florida. As artistic director of American History Theater, Candace implemented an online discussion series examining historical American events on the mental health and marginalized communities in hopes to amplify voices in the community. Candace, as Associate Artistic Director of Trinity Theater Company, built a partnership with Kitabu Club Adventures for our youngest audience to see themselves in the books they read. Additionally, in response to the disproportionate murder of Black and Brown people at the hands of police, she developed a podcast or an oral documentary with Cloudcast Media entitled 846, The Catalyst for Change, as a means of documenting the feelings and responses to the current epidemic. She hopes to continue using her art to tell stories of people whose stories needed to be told. And our final performer, Alexis Young, is a social justice advocate, holistic health healer, and professional stage actor and singer based in New York City. A proud member of the Actors Equity Guild, she was most recently seen in Cincinnati Playhouse and Actors Theater of Louisville's co-production Once on This Island. Alexis toured the United States and Tokyo for 2 years with Rent. Alexis has been seen in several San Diego projects such as Fun Home, Dontrell, Who Kissed the Sea, and In the Wake at the San Diego Rep. The Trip to Bountiful in New York Village Arts, and Snow Days and Winter Nights at Legoland. She's deeply passionate about addressing the damage done by gentrification, racial inequality, and housing inequality, as well as calling out the bypassing of marginalized people within the spirit of wellness communities. Next slide. So first up, so now we will hear from Alexis Young, reading an excerpt from The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Alexis, can you, we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
Oh, Lord. Thank you. All right. The Hate You Give, Chapter 2. When I was 12, my parents had 2 talks with me. One was the usual birds and bees. Well, I didn't really get the usual version. My mom, Lisa, is a registered nurse, and she told me what went where, what didn't need to go here, there, or any damn where till I'm grown. Back then, I doubted anything was going anywhere, anyway. While all the other girls sprouted breasts between 6th and 7th grade, my chest was as flat as my back. The other talk was about what to do if a cop stopped me. Mama fussed and told Daddy I was too young for that. He argued I wasn't too young to get arrested or shot. Star, you do whatever they tell you to do, he said. Keep your hands visible. Don't make any sudden movements and only speak when they speak to you. I knew it must have been serious. Daddy has the biggest mouth of anybody I know, and if he said to be quiet, I needed to be quiet. I hope somebody had the talk with Khalil. He cusses under his breath and turns Tupac down, maneuvers the Impala to the side of the street. We're on Carnation, where most of the houses are abandoned and half the streetlights are busted. Nobody around but us and the cop. Khalil turns the ignition off. Wonder what this fool wants. The officer parks and puts his brights on, and I blink to keep from being blinded, and I remember something else Daddy said. If you're with somebody, you better hope they don't have nothing on them or both of y'all going down. Kay, you don't have anything in the car, do you? I asked. He watches the cop in his side mirror. Nah. The officer approaches the driver's door and taps the window. Khalil cranks the handle to roll it down, and as if we weren't blinded enough, the officer beams his flashlight in our faces. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Khalil breaks a rule. He doesn't do what the cop wants. What you pull us over for? License, registration, and proof of insurance. I said, what you pull us over for? Khalil, I plead, do what he said. That was an excerpt from The Hate You Give. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful reading. Up next, we have Candace Crystal, who will read from The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo.
When class starts, Miss Galliano projects a video, a woman on stage, her voice quiet, then louder and faster like an express train picking up speed. The poet talks about being Black, about being a woman, about how beauty standards make it seem she isn't pretty. I don't breathe for the entire 3 minutes while I watch her hands and face, feeling like she's talking directly to me. She's saying the thoughts I didn't know anyone else had. We're different, this poet and I, in looks, in body, in background. But I don't feel so different when I listen to her. I feel heard. When the video finishes, my classmates, who are rarely excited by anything, clap softly. And although the poet isn't in the room, it feels right to acknowledge her this way, even if it's only polite applause. My own hands move against each other. Miss Galliano asks about the themes and presentation style, but instead of raising my hand, I press it against my heart and will the chills on my arms to smooth out. It was just a poem, Xiomara, I think. But it felt more like a gift. That was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo.
Thank you. That was wonderful. So our final excerpt comes from the book Stamped: Racism, Antiracism in You, read by Carl Atwater. So, Carl, I'm not sure if you're on mute. I don't want to miss any of this. Uh-oh. Carl, can you hear us? Uh-oh. So it's Carl, can you hear? I don't think he can hear us. Okay. So we're having a little technical difficulty. So maybe unplugging the headphones and using the computer mic. No, we still can't hear you. So if you want to try unplugging the headphones. No. So we're going to go ahead and take care of the technical difficulty. And then, but I'd like to introduce Marcos, who will step in and read from the book Stamped, Racism, Antiracism, and You.
Chapter 1, The Story of the World's First Racist. Before we begin, let's get something straight. This is not a history book. I repeat, this is not a history book. At least not like the ones you're used to reading in school. The ones that feel more like a list of dates, there will be some, with an occasional war here and there. A declaration, definitely got to mention that. A constitution, that too. A court case or two, and of course, the paragraph that's read during Black History Month. Harriet, Rosa, Martin. This isn't that. This isn't a history book, or at least it's not that kind of history book. Instead, what this is a book that contains history. A history directly connected to our lives as we live them right this minute. This is a present book. A book about the here and now. A book that hopefully will help us better understand why we are where we are as Americans, specifically as our identity pertains to race. The R word, which for many of us still feels rated R, or can be matched only with another R word, run. But don't. Let's all just take a deep breath. Inhale, hold it, exhale, and breathe out. Race. See? Not so bad. Except for the fact that race has been a strange and persistent poison in American history, which I'm sure you already know. I'm also sure that depending on where you are and where you've grown up, your experiences with it, or at least the moment in which you recognize it, may vary. Some may believe race isn't an issue anymore, that it's a thing of the past, old tales of bad times. Others may be certain that race is like an alligator, a dinosaur that never went extinct, but instead evolved. And though hiding in murky swamp waters, that leftover monster is still deadly. This was an excerpt from Stamped by Jason Reynolds.
Thank you, Marcus. That was great reading and right on the fly. That was awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and, did we get you back?
Yeah, we got me back. I had to turn off my computer and turn it back on. Sorry, I don't know what happened. As soon as the whole thing started, I was hearing double everything, but I'm back.
Oh no, you're back. I am so glad because we want you back in for the next portion when you're sharing your story. So thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to my co-presenter, Starmisha, who will discuss why this work is important.
Yes, so let me first start by saying thank you for all of those riveting excerpts from our performers. As we consider our discussion today, we can certainly feel and hear one reason why this work is important through their powerful readings. Another reason this work is important is because scientific research shows us that children become aware of race as infants. As early as 3 months, they prefer the face of certain racial groups, and by 9 months, they are typically able to recognize faces by race. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with this. Babies are designed to survive, and those babies grow into children who need to make sense of a complex world. The problem occurs when the adults in their lives don't or wait too long to talk about race and ethnicity. We presume to know the right time to have these important discussions without considering that by age 4, children in the US are already associating whites with wealth. And around that same time, they've already begun to develop those racist beliefs. So those beliefs, once they've taken root, can be hard to undo, as our children have inadvertently drank the Kool-Aid, as Jason Reynolds put it. Drinking the Kool-Aid can lead to situations like the one shown in this slide, which reemphasizes why this work is important. You might recall that when you signed up for this event, attendees were asked an optional question about personal experiences with marginalization as a student in the classroom. This wasn't an anonymous submission we received here on the screen. And you might be reading this and think to yourself a few things. Maybe you think, well, the student didn't know any better, or he should have known better, or wow, that teacher didn't say anything or do anything. Maybe he didn't mean it. Many things could have been going through your head. From that testimonial I shared, you also might be thinking about the impact and intent of the teacher and students involved in that experience of marginalization. Broken down, intent is what we mean to convey through our words or actions, while impact is how those words or actions are received. We measure or judge ourselves based on our intention, but measure and judge others based on how they impact us and vice versa. In that previous testimonial, it's important to recognize intent versus impact in all that we do and to prioritize impact. So with that being said, I want you to take a look at a few recent headlines. And as they kind of pop up on the screen, I want you to consider the significance of prioritizing impact over intent. How do these headlines relate to that earlier precept that we see at the bottom of this slide? How do you interpret them? With those things in mind, we're going to spend about 15 minutes, no more, sharing a few more stories related to how impact of a situation the situation does not match the impact that people intended it to do, let me rewind. Share stories related to how the intent of a situation does not match the impact. We're also welcoming submissions from all of you who are out there viewing this live, so you can submit it to us by sending a message. When discussing these situations, we want to keep the norms Susie shared about at the forefront, and we'll review those.
Okay, thank you. So, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to start by giving our actors an opportunity to share these stories. And again, we're going to keep these norms in the forefront, so they're listed on the screen. And the prompt is on the right-hand side. So have you ever felt marginalized as a student? If so, please describe and share your experience. In the meantime, as you are dropping any of your personal experiences into the chat in the comments, Carl, do you mind sharing your experience of feeling marginalized as a student to kick us off?
I'd love to. I went to school in Durham, North Carolina in the 8th grade. And in the 8th grade, they taught math a certain way. It was basically beginner's algebra. And it just worked for my brain. I was absolutely the star student. I was the teacher's pet. The teacher often had me tutor other students because I just got it. Just the way it was taught, it just worked. We went back to my hometown in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for the 9th grade. And in the 9th grade, the first day of class, my math teacher gave us a pop quiz. and she said there's a potential 113 points for this class, for this test. And, it's just so I'll know where you are and can gauge where everyone is in the class. 13 extra credit points, so a total of 113 points. She gave out the test. We all took the test. We come back the next day, and as she's passing out the tests, she said only one person received a perfect score and got all the extra credit. And of course, that was me. And while she's handing me my test in front of the class, she looks at me and she says, either you're a genius or you have no clue what you're doing. And the impact of that on me was almost devastating. And it was clear that she was leaning more to the latter, that you have no clue what you're doing. There was no encouragement at all. And that absolutely impacted me for the rest of that year and into high school. And as a result, I didn't do well in math until I eventually took some graduate math courses and found out that I can do math. But at that point, there was no encouragement, and therefore it had a major impact. And I remember this like it was yesterday. That was like however many years ago. I was 13 or 14, and I'm 63 now. So.
Wow.
Can't hear you.
I lost your audio, Susie.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
There we are.
Right on. Yes, gotta love the online
Yeah.
format.
Sorry, that was my fault. I stole your mic from before. So.
I think it's important to
thank you.
I think it's important to point out that as educators, we have experienced this for the last 6+ months. So everybody's experienced. This is what teachers across the country have been experiencing with students and with one another and in meetings. So this is real life.
Yep. Oh yeah, this is real life. Yep. Yeah. We're just trying to model it for y'all.
Okay.
So, but thank you. That's why I had this sense of urgency of wanting to get you back, having heard your story. I think it resonates with a lot of us, and stories, and just experiences like this really direct our life, the decisions we make in our life, how we perceive ourselves as human beings. Mm-hmm. And so, in thinking of that, I really want to ask some questions to kind of probe a little more about, what was happening in your heart. What were you thinking at that time in that mindset?
Well, when she initially handed me was handing the test back, I was really surprised that I received the perfect score. I was the only one that received that score. The year before, I came out of the 8th grade very confident in math. I repeat, because of the way it was taught, not so much by the teacher, although the teacher was very encouraging. And when I came into this class and she presented it the way she did, it deflated me. I really felt discouraged because of how she said and what she said. And the fact that here I am, a Black student, and this is coming from a white woman. I just didn't get a sense that there was any, I kind of thought, well, there's really no hope because, I repeat, burned in my brain, either you're a genius or you have no clue what you're doing, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And that thing just stuck in my head, and the emphasis was on, or you have no clue what you're doing. And I just went, oh, well, okay, well, she's a teacher. She's a person of authority. So if she thinks I have no clue what I'm doing, I guess I don't. And that absolutely impacted the rest of the year.
Yeah. And how so? Like, as you were saying that it impacted the rest of the year, she's a person of authority. How did it make you feel just being in that class for the rest of the school year?
It made me feel a total lack of confidence in whatever abilities that I had. It was like it wiped out everything from the previous year when I was a straight A student. Okay. I mean, the teacher in the 8th grade, the teacher would leave the class and leave me to tutor and teach the other students. In the 9th grade, it just made me feel, I won't say worthless, but at least not really that competent in this subject. So, I mean, I had a sense of self-worth and self-confidence, But I mean, I'm in the ninth grade, you know, and hormones are raging and all these other things are going on. So I'm questioning myself just as a young adult. And for this teacher to say that to me was very demeaning. And I later realized that she actually was a bit prejudiced. So the fact that that sharp edge hit me day one, and she was consistent in her behavior and her perception for the rest of the year. And that impacted how I handled doing math the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm. So, and then now having a chance to kind of reflect on this and, you know, from the adult mindset, in what way was this situation the result or perpetuated by a system of oppression and privilege as what we know as adults now?
Without a doubt, it occurred to me once I got into high school, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, there was a low to minimal expectation of the Black students in our school system. It was, we were steered away from math and away from science, or I'll say we weren't necessarily steered towards it. The expectation was, well, you're Black, you're not that smart. You probably won't get it. You probably won't need it. And it's no big deal. And it was obvious that the white students were geared or steered towards those classes, those AP classes and so forth. And not 100%, because I knew some of my Black friends who were taking some AP courses. But the expectation, there was no expectation. There was no expectation that I would be able to grasp this. And so I was not steered towards chemistry or trigonometry or, any of the more difficult aspects of the maths and the sciences. Whereas, most of the white students, my white friends, they were taking these classes, and, they kind of steered me towards classes just to, just graduate, and we'll be happy that you graduate.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah, I think those stories resonate very well. I mean, I have my own experience just like that as well. So Thank you for sharing.
And thanks also for sharing how expectations that we have on ourselves and on others can really steer people's trajectories, right, throughout their lives. Yeah. Thank you so much, Carl. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe, Alexis, you had a story that you also wanted to share with us today.
Hi.
Thank you
Can
so
I
much.
be heard? Okay, great.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so when I was in 10th grade in high school, we were reading Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in 10th grade in our literature class, English composition, I believe. And this is obviously a book that has a lot of controversy around it already and has had it for many years due to the N-word that is repeated over and over again from the original manuscript. And I believe there's a publication of it replaced with slave, but at the time it was the N-word. And as a light-skinned, biracial young woman at the time, when I was not in class, I had been called the N-word a couple of times because against the rest of the demographic of the school, I really was the most ethnic in the class of the student body. And so when we were in this class, the teacher had a conversation with us at the time about let's talk about, what it means for historical accuracy and the N-word and how does it make you feel? And this being said, the classing I was in, I was the only Black student in the class at the time. And so we had been having a conversation about how it made us feel. And they had wanted to ask me, the teacher had wanted to point me out and said, hey, Alexis, I understand that you're half Black. Do you have anything to share about this? Which it felt nice to feel like my voice was being, cared about in this conversation. And I started speaking, and one of the students interrupted and said, she's not really Black. What does she really have to say about this? And the teacher chuckled. The teacher kind of laughed and, oh, don't say that. And that was the end of the conversation. And that sentiment, I was about 14, 15 at the time, that sentiment of not being Black enough, not being of color enough to have an opinion about anything around my culture, anything around my people, that stayed with me and still does to this day to an extent. It is something that I have had to unpack for a long time. And it was completely demoralizing as a kid who was trying to figure out my racial identity. And so here I was on the at recess and at lunch being called the N-word, but in class, what does she have to say about this? What could she possibly have to offer this? She's not really Black. So that is one of the few experiences that has really, really stuck to me throughout my life so far.
Thank you so much for sharing, Alexis. I know that there are many people here who can probably really relate to that story, and to the experience of also being biracial and mixed and not being enough of something, whereas you're enough for it to count in certain situations, but not in others. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really powerful. I did want to ask you, how do you think your teacher might have handled that differently in order to create a space where you felt safe?
That is such a great question, because I believe if you're already having a conversation with a story like Huckleberry Finn where the N-word is being used, that moment that I had with that student could have been an incredible springboard for a conversation around racial identity and how literature affects our racial identity and how the conversations around literature can affect our racial identity.
Mm-hmm.
I really do believe that could have been a powerful conversation that could have been had. Like, if we're already talking about Huckleberry Finn and the N-word and historical accuracy and all, what have you, why not also have this conversation of like, okay, like, not to point you out, student, that's calling Lexi out, but why do you feel that, and maybe at the time my teacher didn't feel like, because we were in an educational environment, they didn't feel like it was appropriate for them to speak on it. And I think more than anywhere, the educational environment is the appropriate place to call out behavior and comments and commentary like that. So I do feel like at that time, I do wish my teacher would have used it as a jumping point for, let's open this conversation around literature and racial identity and race. And I would hope in the future that if that comes up for other people, especially with that work, that work of literary, it would be talked about.
Thank you so much. Think about that situation that you were in, and I think about the unspoken message that situation was communicating to the other students in the class through choice of actions or inaction in this case. And so I that really resonates with me, as someone who is working on an ongoing basis with students and teachers. It really resonates. Sometimes it's not always what we do, but what we don't do. That's so impactful.
Absolutely. I don't think teachers sometimes realize, or educators may always realize, that moments like those, comments like those, that is something I have carried in my heart and with my identity for a very long time. When you see an adult or an authority figure not stand up for you, not use it as a point of conversation, you start to think, well, maybe what I thought about myself is all wrong. Maybe I have no, right to talk about these things. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Cassiopeia, one thing that comes to mind is I'm listening to her story, the impact of what your engagement or disconnection from how you engage for the rest of the school year. And this is how you lose students in that important dialogue and analyzing literature in moments that happen for a fraction of the time, and then for the rest of the year they're disengaged. And that saying that, hearing that it sits with your heart, because I share that experience as someone who is fair-skinned. It takes a lifetime for some to shed that and to rebuild their self-identity. So thank you for your offering and your sharing.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And Candace, I believe you also were going to share a story with us today as well.
Hi, yes, I was. So I went to a magnet high school, so we had drama, theater. band, dance, and a couple of others, but it was actually a really diverse school, and it was in Miami, Florida. And one of the experiences I will never forget was senior year. We were prepping our monologues and such for college auditions. And I don't know what monologue it was that I had gotten, but another young lady in my class was like, oh man, her monologue is so much better than mine. And we had this teacher who would come in and work with us on our monologue prep in senior year. And I will never forget when the young lady commented on the monologue I chose. The instructor points to me and says, you can do any role that this other young lady who is white presenting, that she could do, but then points to her and says, but you could never do every role that Candace can do. And to this day, it sticks with me because I think that really shaped how I now teach my students in the arts education programs that we work with, because there are these differences. And I know race is like a bad word that people never want to talk about in the schools, but if we don't start having those conversations early on and ingraining them in our children for when they become adults, that's how you end up with shows where we're having to then argue it out with people on why this isn't your story to tell. You can present the story and that's great, and you can be an ally and all of those things, but knowing when to amplify someone else's voice is so much more important. So that story to this day has stuck with me because I think that that's one way you can teach kids about this industry, number one. And number two, hopefully it translates over to some of these other industries that they go into, because it's a great way to teach them expression, but it also teaches them how to stand up for everybody else.
Exactly. Thank you for that, for sharing your story, Candace, and sharing how that made you feel. Just so curious, how do you think the other students in that class reacted to that, especially those who may have been, like you said, white presenting, or other students that are representing other cultures? How do you think that that was received by them?
I will say this instructor, she is maybe 4'11", she's tiny, and she tells it like it is. And with the group we had, I really felt everyone received that and could acknowledge it because she was talking to a predominantly person of color group. So I also think that that does something for our psyche, being in a program that all of us are going to college auditions, and most of the people who are at these auditions don't look like us. Mm-hmm. So it was just, yeah, it was something I think everyone kind of took in and was like, oh, her name was Ellen. It was like, Miss Ellen's not playing with us. Okay. And I think everybody understood that as like, oh, so my space in this industry is a bit different than maybe so-and-so's.
Mm. And so do you think, as you reflect on her response, do you think that she responded positively? Like, talk to me about the power dynamics within that group and if it shifted or anything.
I don't think it shifted in a negative way. I think there was this level of respect that we as students had for Miss Ellen, because her being a white woman and knowing that she does have that level of privilege, and especially with dealing with a group of students who are mostly BIPOC students, and her willingness to just be honest and say, hey, when you enter the industry, this is not always going to be what you see. You may have to fight for these roles that you want, but you are like, you've earned that space just as much as the next person. And that was, for me, that was something really powerful. I mean, this is the woman who, she worked for a school out in Texas, and she was like, I want you to make sure you go there, and I want you to make sure you audition. And even if you get in, don't feel like you have to go because of me, but I want you to make sure you're there because your talent is there. And that is validating as a student of color in a school that, yeah, we're very diverse. But when you start looking at like the big picture of theater programs across the nation, there's this conversation of accessibility, and you know, BIPOC students deserve a spot just as much as any other. And that's the important thing for me that I took from her, was that you can be an ally in the classroom, and that will resonate 5, 10, 20 years down the line. Here I am, but almost 15 years later, and I'm still thinking about that conversation.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you continue to plant those seeds with your students, which, as the previous individuals that shared their stories, talked about the importance of planting that seed and speaking into the lives of our students and having these dialogues and creating these safe spaces. So
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, you are your students' biggest allies, but you can also be their biggest detriments too.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much again. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. That was so well said too, that the power that a teacher has in the life of their student cannot be understated. So it's also important as we're moving through, and I don't see any comments in the chat, but if there are any, please feel free to continue to drop them in, and we're happy to connect with you as well to discuss those further. But it is important as we're having conversations like these ones in our classrooms, especially ones where we're asking our students to be vulnerable, that we as facilitators are considering several elements. So we have some considerations and then some questions for you. Some considerations might be, are we challenging or perpetuating systems of oppression? Are we addressing the system itself or a symptom? When it comes to intent versus impact, what could have been done instead to empower? And what might the unintended outcomes or consequences be? I wanted to share these questions as well for you. They're rooted in restorative justice, and they're intended to help you move a positive, productive conversation forward. Now, these questions should sound familiar because we use them in our conversation today. So here are some of those questions that you might ask. You might ask, what happened? What were you thinking about at the time? What have you thought about since? Who has been affected by this event? In what ways have they been affected? In what way was this situation the result of or perpetuated by a system of oppression and or privilege? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? And we hope that you'll continue to use these considerations and these questions in your own conversations and creating safe spaces for your students so that they're able to have a more positive experience like the one Candace had, as opposed to a more negative experience like the ones that Carl and Alexis had. And Susie, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I had a little bit of internet trouble, so I'm hoping you all can hear me okay.
We sure can.
So good. So as you have witnessed from our stories from our actors, our words, behaviors, and biases have impacts, lifelong impacts. So this is why culturally relevant and responsive learning environments must be embraced and prioritized for our children. So I'd like to introduce to you 3 strategies that we'll be focusing on today that educators can use when implementing this work into their classrooms. So the first strategy we'll discuss will be how to utilize a precept or quote of the day to enhance class discussion. Then model the second strategy of passage or chapter selections for text analysis and discussion. For the final strategy, we will share examples of incorporating culturally relevant books into unit plans and full text lessons. So Starmisha will start us off with the first strategy.
Okay, so we're going to get into precepts or quotes of the day. And I'd really like to, acknowledge that we've kind of done some of this work around this concept already. I'd set up early for us some slides and we talked about intent versus impact. And I was jotting notes as people shared their stories. And so again, we had so many examples of this. But in a sense, a precept is, simply put, it's a guiding principle or rule that can set the purpose or intention for your class, a group, a project, or in our case, a discussion or a dialogue. I use precepts often with others inside and outside of a school setting. As a school psychologist, I use them in my counseling groups. But when I'm working in classrooms with teachers, that's a perfect time. You absolutely can use this in your classrooms as well. And so in addition to setting the tone, they can shift the direction of a conversation. And I just kind of think back to the examples that we got from all of our actors when they shared out, specifically Alexis's or Crystal's, like how amazing, well, Candace's, I just always say Crystal first. How amazing, right? In those different scenarios, we saw how differently they went, right? Where Candace's teacher, like how she brought that class back and talked about, the topic versus Alexis's, who just kind of probably didn't know what to say in that group and kind of brushed it off. So again, you can kind of make it a formal discussion at the beginning of your lesson, and we'll talk more about that. But a quote of the day is a little different, but pretty self-explanatory. They're meant to inspire us, to center us, to spark thoughts or a discussion. And you can really find that quotes of the day can be closely related to the precept. And so one that I thought about when we initially talked about prioritizing intent impact over intent, I thought about Maya Angelou's, like at the end of the day, people will remember what you said or did. They'll remember how you made them feel. And I felt like those were closely related. And we kind of heard those through our stories of our actors, what they shared out, right? Mm-hmm. These are experiences that have lived on for them. And so they might not always gel perfectly, but I think you can certainly put the precept and a quote of the day together. And Susie's going to just talk a little bit more about how you set that up in your classroom setting.
Okay, so thank you. So the setup for incorporating a precept or quote of the day into the classroom doesn't have to be complicated. It can be quite simple. So you might want to start by discussing shared or agreed norms, follow up by sharing a precept. So earlier we used the important to prioritize impact over intent. So you as an educator can share a precept, or a student in your class can share one. So depending on how you want to incorporate a precept or quote of the day into your classroom or lesson, each student might be able to share at least once throughout the course of the school year or unit. So however, it really is up to you and the dynamics of your classroom on how you utilize it. So pose a guiding question or two. And so our questions that we pulled together for you all would be, why is the quote significant? So share a situation when the intent didn't match the impact. So really asking those probing questions to have students critically analyze and reflect on that phrase given. So another question you could ask to start the conversation could be, does anyone know where a precept related to, and it could be any given topic that you're discussing, can be found? So for example, could they have found something like that via social media, books, or even within in individuals' life experiences? So we were able to briefly take a look at some recent headlines related to Black History Month and school-related news stories to see or deduce how precepts can show up in imagery or text. Yet another question that could be brought into the conversation is, can precepts be rooted in racism? So we think about just some of the little phrases that are out there that are very oppressive, all lives matter, and how that's used to really demean the Black Lives Matter movement and what the essence of that message is trying to convey. So as we unpack those above questions, we can again refer to our reference questions and lean into during classroom conversations or a discussion circle. So connected activities that can bring the precept or quote to life. So engage in dialogue about the precept and related questions as we've modeled earlier. So through the use of passage or articles and through the use of video clips. So I'm going to hand it over to Camilla to go into the next strategy.
Thank you, Susie. Strategy two is the passage and chapter analysis and discussion. And so in here, we look at how to introduce this literature in your classroom. And this could be excerpts, it can be passages as we did earlier, or it can be a chapter. And what this does is it allows for a deep dive into the text and sets the stage for a robust discussion. Analyzing the text really compels students to reflect on their own beliefs and perhaps even challenge them, as we've seen and heard throughout this process. It encourages them to look for the why and to connect ideas and to really examine claims and literature with a critical lens. And so here is a few strategies that I've used. And let me start off like I am no expert. I love giving honor to the people who have given me tools and helped me to be where I am. I did this work with Cassiopeia, and so she is a rock star, and we were a dynamic team, and something that I value, but something that was largely successful in my classroom. And so here we have a few strategies: surveying the text, read with the grain, and read against the grain. And this is from a course that I taught. It's expository reading and writing curriculum. and it was at the senior level in high school, but it's totally adjustable for 7 through 12 setting. It's also accessible if you, like myself, taught students that receive services under special education eligibilities. So I love this because, oftentimes we see the watering down, if you will, of curriculum, and the simplifying of curriculum as a means to make it accessible, where here you can really adjust it and make it accessible without taking away from the rigor and the meat, without taking away the problem solving aspect and the critical thinking aspect of it, and really in a way that all students can engage in text in a meaningful way. So start off with survey the text. And it's just a few quick things. And this is something that you would do either with an excerpt or you can do it with a magazine article, which I did a lot. You can, or a periodical from online, a text, literature, as we've seen previously. And then you would just quickly review the title, and make predictions based on what's in the title. Have students look at the author. Now, the author and the publication and the date. Now, this, in my experience, is what I found to be lead to some focused dialogue with students. When they start to look at the background of the author and the demographic of the individuals or the groups that read the publication and the date, that really sets them up to have dialogue with things like considering perception and intent and credibility, and then looking at things, talking about facts and social status and culture. So that doing the background and finding out the background research on the authors or the writers is really critical piece to this strategy. Also looking at the length, and this is a little more challenging one, depth and breadth. It can be challenging for students to understand this at first, but I recommend that you do this as a guided practice and discuss it about the text every time. And then it becomes part of a protocol that you can establish in the classroom. You give enough background and details to paint, when you're looking at depth. Depth is given enough background and details in a story, or that you see a full picture. Whereas when you're looking at text that kind of touches on many points, that's breadth. And so you really walk students through that. And then the 1, 2, 3, or the read paragraphs, and you have to emphasize the resist for students to do more, but you want them to read the first paragraph, the second paragraph, sometimes the third, and the last. And then the students are like, wait, what? You don't want me to read the whole thing? You have to say not yet. And we really do this work to you're still making predictions and you're getting deep into this text, and you're looking for things like, what is the main claim, or what is this piece really trying to say and suggest, and how do I know that? And the last part of that survey of the text is you want to have them look at the proper nouns and the visuals in the text. You make up your key, they can highlight, they can circle. You really want this passage to be totally marked up. And some students that may not work, you say, well, my paper is messy. You want to encourage that. And if it's not on paper, and if you're in a virtual learning model, absolutely you can do this. There's another slide that's coming up that you can see. Feel free to take out your phones and do a screenshot, or a screenshot on your computer right now. I do believe that these tools will be available towards the end. And when we go to read against the grain, this is when we start to really getting into the heart of the text. You have students divided up. Sometimes that looks like I take a passage and I cut it into strips. And you want them to, which part of this text, or this passage or excerpt, is the intro? Which part is the conclusion? Which sections in the text is where the author shifts their point of view or their subject? And I'm telling you, I love this because my students, and I taught again, they call it special ed English 12 and 11. These students love these strategies, and this one particular, because it really compels them and engages them into a dialogue. Oh, they were talking about this, and then right about paragraph, let's say 5, they change the subject. You really want them to look at it with that critical of an eye, and they naturally intuit that and are able to do that, excuse me. And so the next part of that reading with the grain is identifying those main claims and identifying the types of evidence. And usually what you can have them do is going through the article. And again, you want to model this, repetitively, maybe over the course of a month, 2 months, 3 months, until they get to the point where the students are doing it automatically. And as you're building your protocol, and as you're looking for the main claim, you have them write MC for main claim, or they can just highlight it with a highlighter. And then you want to look at whatever my main claim is, what types of evidence support that. I have an ERWC notebook that's linked here that I can share as well. And it really breaks down the types of evidence. Is it factual? Is it expert testimony? Is it statistics and research? Is it personal, anecdotal? Is it a commonly held belief or assumption? Is it a comparison, or is it hypothetical? And the next and last one is reading against the grain. And you really, in this one, it's like an outline where you start to chunk the paragraph. And students find the implicit and explicit meanings within the text. So they're really digging into, what is this piece saying? What is the author trying to get me to understand, do, believe, feel, perceive, think in this given article or this passage? And for each of those sections, it can be as simple as writing 2 sentences for each paragraph. And it's just 2 guiding questions when you're looking at explicit. What exactly is being written in this paragraph? Okay, what is the author trying to write? What is he or she saying? And implicit, what is the author trying to imply? What are they trying to say that they're not really saying? Or what's speaking to me? What do I get from this piece? And then the other piece that's hand in hand with that is you want to have students consider the audience. Who is this written for? What are the characteristics that may make up that group of individuals? It sort of ties in with the survey and the text, where you're looking at this group of individuals is what the writers had in mind, or the editors had in mind for this particular passage or this particular text. So it's really taking students and digging into this. And again, this is with a passage or a chapter. We haven't even gotten through the full book story study. And this really gets them into diving deep into the text. It allows teachers to not only engage students in a variety of text of a variety of backgrounds, where students can see their own stories reflected in what they read, or they can read stories that are instances or occurrences or events that are happening in their own communities, if you're talking about an article. And then lastly, this can be done without, the time constraint of we have to get through a 500-page book, or we have to do this. This can help you build curriculum and help you collaborate with students in building a full book story. So then you have buy-in from students, because they have done this with, maybe you can lead them to do this with maybe a few books that you're thinking on introducing to the class. And then this way you narrow it down based on this information that the students have obtained. You ask them, what does everyone feel led to read based on all of this? And so now you have a commitment and a likelihood that they will get into this literature and really fall in love with the stories and the words and the writing styles that are within these books. That is important. What's most important in that is student choice is at the center. So those are 3 strategies you can use. And again, there is a notebook that there's probably about 20 pages that I have linked that can go with this. You could totally introduce this into your classroom. Again, all levels as well. Can we move to the next slide, please? And so here's just an example of an annotated text from the book, an excerpt from the book of Stamp, and going in order. And they're rainbow colors, and that's a different strategy, red, orange, yellow, blue, green. You can start in order. And again, because my background is special ed, I use a lot of these color coding and visuals to engage students and to make content accessible. And so you look at here, you have the title, and the information up here is making prediction about the title. And then you can give students the sentence frame. I predicted this chapter on the front end, and you could scaffold it as much as you'd like. And then you go into this orange part where it's the background information on Reynolds and Dr. Kendi. And you really get to, it talks about other works that they've done, the year in which this was published, maybe some comments that they've made, or some other periodicals that they've appeared in or written for. And then there's another section here in yellow, you're looking at the length, is talking about that depth or breadth of the article. And the green section here is whether you're reading the first, third, and last paragraph, and you're really getting out that, making predictions based on that of what you will be reading about. And then the purple section, lastly, is circling those proper nouns or things that are visuals, graphics, charts, anything of that nature. You could have even, this word race and how it's printed, that could even be something to be circled. But this is, the student engaging with the text. And this is an example of how it would be marked up if you were doing this online. So it's a great protocol that you can build and adapt or adjust with the diversity to fit the diverse learning needs of the students that were in your class. And then the next slide, we have a 4-sentence rhetorical pieces, and I'll just highlight over this. This is also, we have all this also available. And it's just a 4-part, it's an expanded summary of the text and maybe a passage. And you're really looking at the sentence, and it's very structured in a template, and it's, name the author, give an explanation of how the author develops and support the main claim, a statement of the author's apparent purpose, and a description of the intended audience. And again, this is color coded, and it can look like this. And this is actually from a movie. So you can really use a passage or an excerpt from a film, a book, or any type of literature or art, so that the students can really dive deeply into this text and really understand the purpose and the claims and the point of views and perceptions from the writer, from the reader, from all sides. Next slide, please. And then this is an 8-question argument analysis. Another extension that you can use with students. Again, this is accessible for all students and adjustable for whatever class structure you have. And these are ways to approach literature in a very personal and intimate way. This allows for freedom of thought, freedom of voice, freedom of insight. These tools can be adjusted to build protocols or curriculum that is non-conforming to the status quo. We've heard that before. Things like you having students think about what's the general issue and topic and problem of this that the author is writing about. Does the author suggest a solution? Dropping down to number 6, what assumptions and values does the author seem to have? Love that assumptions part, really getting the students into that. And then 7, why does the author think this issue is important? And lastly, if the author's proposal or solution were to be accepted and implemented by society, what would the consequences be? I think that's huge. And this is something that students can do in a group, whether they're in person, online in breakout rooms, or online working collaboratively, independently, during independent time, etc. This can be adjusted as well. And so all of this brings me to a really wonderful quote by Dr. Goldie Muhammad, who was the author of Cultivating Genius. And it really speaks to why we need to read, why we need to do these strategies, why we need to really take a critical eye to curriculum and current curriculum and really start to shift towards stories that are representative of the students that we serve, to tell the stories of Black and Indigenous people of color students that represent that group. And she says we must stop implementing curriculum and literacy models that were not designed for or by people of color, expecting that these models will advance the educational achievement of children of color. This is the same as designing a size 2 ball gown for a size 10 model. We expect youth to work inside of frameworks that were not designed for them. So this speaks to the heart and the importance of how critical this work is. Thank you. I now pass it on to Cassiopeia. She has the next strategy coming up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camila, and thank you for sharing that great quote. It's really powerful. Now, strategy number 3 is going to be tackling unit development and full text work. And we know that there are a variety of ways to use full text, project-based learning, and unit study work to explore equity issues in your classroom. And I know that many of you are already familiar with lit circles and novel studies. So to maximize our time, I'm going to instead engage in a conversation about other activities that you can use to support the beginning of the work. I'm going to show you some actionable ways that you can prepare students to engage with texts like these ones today in their entirety. And the bottom line is that you, as the facilitator of your classroom, have the power to intentionally introduce skills and activities that are acknowledging the students' diverse backgrounds and cultural identities, as well as to condemn the harm that's been done in a systemically oppressive system. And also, you have the power to actively seek to develop historically and culturally relevant literacy as a means of creating agency for our students. So I want to start off by pointing out that you can't assume anything. You can't assume that students know how to read rhetorical text, which is why Camila just modeled the ERWC template and ways of reading those texts. You also can't assume that students will recognize microaggressions or implied claims or understand how to process that information once they do begin to read it. So all of these steps are things that we as adults are continuing to develop, right? Sometimes we do this through conversations on Facebook, or sometimes we do it at the proverbial water cooler, but we have to teach them. We have to teach our students what a claim looks like. We have to teach them how to tell whether evidence is sufficient, relevant, credible, and appropriate. We have to teach them to be critical thinkers. We do this intentionally, methodically, with purpose. And then once we think they have those skills, we have to give them chances to practice them. Now, when I say practice, I'm not just speaking about reading articles and annotating them and writing essays. Obviously, those are portions of what we do in our classrooms, but we have an opportunity here, right? We have a chance to help our students make meaning of text in a new way and to retrain their brains to understand that literacy is about both what is read and written and also what is spoken and heard. So make use of your resources. Lean into Tai Selassie's TED Talk, "Don't ask where I'm from, ask where I'm a local." Pull graduation speeches, maybe like the one Michelle Obama delivered last year. Have students go on an archaeological dig for new meaning in those transcripts. You also have to commit to bringing the things that they want to talk about to the table. Are they coming to your class worried about hate speech or racial profiling? Ignoring those issues doesn't put them out of mind, it just moves them out of sight. Give your students the opportunity to engage with their peers in a safe space with you as the facilitator. Lean into those conversations, just like we've asked you to lean into discomfort today. And yes, give the texts you teach a hard look, right? To Kill a Mockingbird does tackle race issues, but in what way? Professor Angela Shaw Thornburg spoke candidly about how the book represents, quote, African Americans as peripheral, incapable of self-representation, monumentally passive, and positively grateful for the small compensation of white guilt over injustices done to African Americans. So ask yourself, even if you do have to teach an outdated text, are there supplementary texts you can bring in that don't feature white protagonists? Can your shelf house novels like The Hate U Give, Dear Martin, or I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter? Can you veer away from Gatsby for a minute and dive into the Harlem Renaissance? Can you celebrate the brilliant Black women who inspired Hidden Figures when you work with your students on analyzing author's choice or theme? And beyond that, pull photos, political cartoons, historical artifacts. You can get students talking with restorative circle questions, as we modeled earlier, or if you're nervous about it, you can use a protocol like this one, which we call the Silent Symposium, where we have students reply entirely in writing to one another. It's like a completely silent in-person discussion board. Obviously, this could be translated very easily online. I also want to say you shouldn't shy away from pulling photos that make a statement. Can you imagine the conversations we had in our classes after we reviewed these images taken by Chris Buck for O Magazine? The photo essay flips the script on existing stereotypes and helps students begin to explore the intersection of race, class, and power. Once you have your texts and your artifacts chosen, you get to decide what we do with them. So ask yourself, how can I facilitate brave conversations? How can I support my students in identifying and challenging the ways in which they are complicit with or impacted by systemic inequity? Can they co-create products that require a collective understanding, discussion of the material, while challenging implicit biases and supporting other students' experiences? Here you can see a formative assessment which was created after working through the material in a TED Talk about racial privilege. This didn't happen in isolation, but by having those brave conversations, being vulnerable with one another, acknowledging privilege, and then divvying up a variety of rhetorical tasks, we were able to engage in not only a rich conversation, but also a very robust analysis protocol on that text. And then I'd like to offer that you have an opportunity to decide where your work is going. This summative assessment shown here demanded that students select an article on a social justice topic of their choice. They did a full rhetorical read on the article, identified suasive diction throughout, reconstructed that suasive diction in a way that is now representing their personal viewpoints on the topic via found poem. We then used upcycled resources to develop collages aligned with their messaging, and finally, wrapped with a March Madness style bracket poetry performance read in class. Just imagine hundreds of kids sharing aloud their personal thoughts about racial injustice, gender norms, misogyny, xenophobia. These are some of the excerpts from the pieces from last spring. Border Patrol use race. No justification. Stopped. Not law breaking. Or the second one, Imaginary Colorblind Society. Police shoot unarmed Black man. Anger is inevitable. Riots spilling into our streets. Or the headlines pop with alarming frequency. People of color going about their daily routines only to have the cops called on them. This is everyday racial profiling. It has an insidious ripple: business, health, public safety. Or one indignity piled atop another, dehumanizing, enormous health consequences, constancy of stress to live under a cloud of suspicion and implicit bias. Seeds planted in our heads before kindergarten. Recognize your own bias. These poems that I've read to you, they're obviously excerpts of a larger poem, but these are the experiences that our students are claiming as their own. These are the experiences that our students want us to hear. We as teachers have to be brave enough to show up and to give them a safe space so that they can show up in all of their authenticity as well.
Okay, great, thank you. So, and on that note, I'd like for us to take a few minutes for questions and really open it up for anyone who wants to put in a reflection as well. So in the event that you have some specific wonderings or thoughts about the things we've spoken about today and how to be an ally and begin the work on being an anti-racist educator. If you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat, and we'd love to, as a group, go ahead and tackle them now. And I'm going to invite my co-presenters to join me up here as well to help answer any questions, or even if you had a reflection of what you heard today, we'd love to hear from you.
I do see a comment in the chat that says, get them exposed to multiple texts and then allow choice to dig deeper into something they're interested in. And I love that. I think that's so powerful, right? That idea of creating a space for children and adults as they grow to bring their own fully authentic experience to the classroom and to be diving into their identity, regardless of what it is, and to give them the opportunity to make that identity part of what their curriculum looks like. So thank you so much for that comment.
It's how you spark a love of literature, right? Versus these, you typically hear people say, well, what's your list? What's your list? It's a predetermined, these predetermined list of stories that the adults or educators or people who are non-educators have put together for students to read, versus having the student engage in a variety of texts and have them create the lists and have them help build the curriculum is critically important for students, especially Black and Indigenous people of color, to spark that love of literature, because there's so much power in the stories that are being told in these books that students are not having access to or opportunities to read in class.
And I think just to add to that, I know we've been kind of focusing on middle and high school, but we absolutely can have that same dialogue and that same autonomy for our younger students as well. And we continue to build that up. So when they do get to middle and high school, they already kind of know what the program is, if you will.
That's a great point. It's a great point. Starting to have that dialogue when they're young. And there's so many opportunities, as one of the I think it was Alexis that when Cassiopeia asked her, what could the teacher have done? You take those moments and you use them as a springboard to having a dialogue about what might that look like? How does that make you feel? What ideas or assumptions do you have about that? And let's look at and that can be, you can adjust it, as I said, little kids, kindergarten, third grade, first grade, because as you shared earlier, the data on the age of which kids start to recognize race and culture and whatnot, I think it's important. And to do so from a space of love and empowerment. This is what we all look like, and we're all valued and we're all loved. You should love your hair and your skin and your culture and what that represents, as well as anyone else's, and not be intimidated or afraid of somebody's expression of their own.
I did also want to add on that. I do see a question that I would love to circle around to. But before we do that, I also wanted to add on to that, to say that Carl and Alexis both spoke of experiences that were personally challenging to them. Candace also spoke about an experience, but how it empowered her. And I think that it's really important for us to also acknowledge that we're human and we're not always going to react perfectly in the moment. And nobody is asking perfection of anyone else, right? But we're asking for growth. And we would love to empower our educators, if they've had an uncomfortable experience, to not be afraid to bring it back together. And that's a huge tenet behind restorative justice, is this idea of coming back together and talking through something after the fact. So if someone in a classroom has had an experience like the one that Carl or Alexis had, it's certainly not too late once students leave that room to repair that situation and to help to create a space within that classroom where that trust is able to be built back up, where students can feel safe and where they continue to grow and flourish and not feel that they have to stay inside of this small box that our society has created with the system of systemic inequity. Next question I see just pops up on the screen. It says, great ideas and methods. How do you pull parents into this, especially parents that might feel threatened by this discussion?
Great question.
Yeah, it is.
I think it's a really great question. And I think, that word threatened, right? That word threatened is really powerful, isn't it?
Susie, were you going to say something?
So I might computer started spinning and I was about to say something. I hope I have good internet connection with you all. Yes, this has been a challenge, especially in my community here in, close to the Midwest or Colorado. We've received pushback. And oftentimes in some of the trainings that I've done around implicit bias and cultural proficiency, it's really having these reflective conversations with parents that are really, when we ask about, how are you feeling about this? Or how, we've asked that of our actors who have their own experiences with racism. We can ask that about, what's the root cause? What is really impacting or making people feel defensive? And it's kind of taking that psychological approach of moving folks away from that feeling of defensiveness, and they're not losing anything by engaging in these conversations, but it's really wanting to know other, experiences of other folks in the classroom, of other students in the classroom, and honoring all the individuals in the classroom as well. And it's really not an attempt to demean or, where others are coming from, but it's really creating a culture within our classroom environment to honor the spaces where everybody is coming from. And so it is an ongoing, it's really setting up norms and relationships with parents early on and continuing that open conversation with folks as we start bringing in those conversations into the classroom and keeping them involved in the process as well and engaged in the conversations. Those are some of the things that I've done in my own classes with parents who've kind of been a little uncomfortable with this. And it's really moving away from a space of guilt and resentment to more of having an open mind and taking away from, we're not wanting to pull away from your experiences or demean your own experiences, but we're really wanting to bring others at the same level. So everybody is honored and respected in the same capacity.
I agree. I think it's getting to a space and certainly having this dialogue with parents to where the sharing of experiences and creating that space where we're active listeners to people's experiences, and you can still have your own opinions, but you're just hearing someone's experience, which isn't, and that's rooted in authenticity. When I experienced this, therefore it made me feel like this. And that could be for any person. And I think once you step back from all of the outside energy and really just focus on, and I've seen this happen with parents, this is what their experience was, and this is what they understood. I think the way in which you use the words and when you're engaging in conversations is, I speak with parents a lot, and it's going back to some of those same questions that you can do with students in the classroom. How did it make you feel? Reflecting on what are my own assumptions going into this space? What's my ultimate goal? Well, my ultimate goal, even with parents who are quote unquote feeling threatened or who might have pushback, at the end of the day, our common goal is everyone wants their children to be successful and to do well, to be healthy, well-rounded individuals, to have a strong love of self, a strong love of community, and a strong love of family. And when you focus on that, no matter what your individual backgrounds are, the differences in your experiences or beliefs, you keep it at the center of, we are ultimately here to do this work so that our children are more than, better than, or set up for more than what we have, so that they have that they are forward, that they're successful in life.
This actually reminds me of the conversation we had a few weeks back when we all sat and met, and meeting people where they're at. So for years, I've taught educators and community around cultural proficiency, and it's a spectrum where we go from the most cultural destructiveness to cultural incompetency to colorblindness, pre-competency, competency to proficiency. And, you have to meet, we're all in these different spaces along that continuum. And I've often talked to individuals where I thought they were at one point, and I'm asking these questions or we're engaging in conversation. It was like, oh, well, they're over here, I'm over here, and vice versa. And so it's really meeting people where they're at. And it involves a lot of patience and forgiveness of yourself,
Grace.
maybe for not saying the right thing, grace of yourself, grace of others, and
Yes.
really utilizing the I statements. I've done a lot of work around mental health, dialectical behavioral therapy, and it's, not veering away from the you should, or we're doing this because, you should be this way. And it's
Absolutely.
really, I feel, or I am, and take that I stance. So the empower, there's a lot of power around utilizing the I statements as a way of de-escalating the situation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that another important thing to keep in mind is this idea of centering what our classroom looks like. Because you're saying, how do you pull parents into this, especially parents that might feel threatened by the discussion? And the honest truth is that when I'm in my classroom, I'm a guide on the side. I'm not a sage on the stage. I'm not lecturing to my students. I'm not telling them how to believe. I am letting them explore their own identity and their own beliefs. And ultimately, isn't what a classroom is about? It's about a classroom as a place not where teachers teach, but a place where students learn.
Absolutely.
And we make sure that our classroom is a safe place, every single one of our students to learn.
That's why I said those tools that we shared, it sets the stage for freedom of thought, freedom of ideas, freedom of voice. And that's really what we want. And that's what, you're starting to hear younger. I can't believe I'm in that group where you're saying younger generation. So students, that's a critical need that they want, this freedom to just be, and think and feel and experience
And to not
without.
have to suppress their authentic self.
Exactly.
And I think another way to engage parents in that discussion, and you've all shared it, is encouraging the parents to talk to their kids. Because I think sometimes it's a hesitation because we feel like the kids aren't ready for those conversations, not knowing all along they're having those conversations, they're being exposed to those conversations. So by you sitting down with your child and really being open and non-judgmental and willing to listen to them, I think it will give parents more confidence in those subject matters that are tough. Because our kids know so much more than we give them credit for.
Yes. And as a parent, really encourage, I'm a teacher and a parent, really encouraging parents to be open to learning new things. There's so many things that, I have a 20-year-old and a 7-year-old. There's so many things that I'm learning or that I've learned throughout my oldest high school years and my youngest, even in elementary, that I'm thankful that I'm open to, I didn't really see it that way. And being that, I went to high school in the 90s. So having my thinking has shifted because I was given the space and to learn and to grow and to think differently. And I think as parents, we should remember that our own experiences when we were our children's ages, and saying, this is another opportunity for me as a parent to learn or to connect with my child and to walk this learning path with them.
Love these ideas that are joining us in the chat here, meeting people where they are at, having compassion, being mindful about your engagements, asking for consent to share new concepts and perspectives, which gives them a chance to receive and shows if they're truly open, right? And that kind of reminds me of our norm of making sure that we're with the intent to listen, not with the intent to respond. And so thank you so much, everyone, for participating in this great process. Please feel free to drop further questions in there, and we will make sure that we try to address them in our future events as well. As circle back around, maybe we'll do a little social media campaign or something where we can answer some of your questions. So thank you very much. We really, really appreciate you. Starmisha, do you want to talk a little bit about the resources we have available to our educators?
Sure. So if you would like to read more books centered around or rooted in anti-racism, you can visit our bookshop by visiting bipoc.support.foundation.org and clicking the bookshop link. We have curated and are continuing to curate lists of fiction and nonfiction books for pre-readers, teens, adults, and everyone in between. And our bookshop is for everyone, those of you who are in the field of education and those of you in the community at large. On our website, you can subscribe to our newsletter, donate to our nonprofit to keep up with the work that we are doing, and access our offerings under the resources tab. And then finally, we have a survey that we'd love for you all to fill out if you can. It's located at bit.ly/BSF2021 or B as in boy, I, T as in Tom, /B as in boy, S as in Sam, F as in fish, 2021. Not only will it help give us feedback about today's event, it'll also get you on the list for a free bookmark from us all to you in the mail, celebrating the launch of our book club. And it will provide you with an opportunity to sign up for subsequent discussions talking about the books that we heard excerpts from today, giving you choice. You can find the resources mentioned below in our description. We'll have all that information down there.
Thank you, everyone, for being involved in this important conversation today. As we wrap up, I would like to take a moment to thank our speakers, our artists, and our sponsors without whom this event would be possible. And if you feel so moved, here are their handles where you can follow them on social media and show them some love. Once again, thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a blessed day.